The East India Company that entered India as traders went on to snatch the reins from the government and was gradually transforming into a territorial colonial power. The company did this in three ways. One, subsidiary alliance. Second, direct possession. And third, through the policies of the doctrine of lapse. When the British arrived in India, the Indian subcontinent were already in the rule of the Mughal Empire. Eventually, the Mughal rule started declining, fading away with the death of the most powerful and influential emperor Aurangzeb in 1707. After Aurangzeb and a few Mughal rulers did take the throne, but none really proved to be as influential as the ones who had ruled earlier. Finally, Bahadur Shah II, the Mughal ruler, came to an end in 1857. But the circumstances had already begun changing after the death of Aurangzeb in 1707 itself. And history is proof that the Europeans had discovered the Indian shores even way before the Mughal rule commenced in India itself. That was a little background, but a little build-up before I get into how the East Indian Company spread its roots in India. So by 1857, by the time the Mughal Sultanate was completely wiped out, the East India Company had spread its roots far and wide. It came to exercise the direct rule over about 63% of the territory and 78% of the population of the Indian subcontinent. This, combined with its indirect influence on the remaining territory and the population of the country, the East India Company had virtually the whole of India under its control. Like I said before, after Aurangzeb's death, the Mughal Empire had begun to collapse. On the 12th of August 1765, the Mughal Emperor appointed the East India Company as the Diwan of Bengal. How did this happen? Well, the person behind this was the famous Robert Clive. Clive was the first Baron of Plassey, who was a soldier in the British Army, and he was also served as the first British Administrator of Bengal. He was one of the early movers, one of the early creators of British power in India. In his first governorship that ranged from 1755 to 5 years later in 1760, he won the famous Battle of Plassey and went on to become the master of Bengal. In his tenure of second governorship, which was from 64 to 67, he reorganized the British colony. Here, Robert Clive is seen accepting the Diwani of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa from the Mughal ruler in 1765. It is a display of a majestic occasion taking place in a grand setting. But to tell you the truth, the actual event most probably took place in Robert Clive's tent, with a few Englishmen and Indians in attendance as witnesses. It is said that the painter was commissioned by Robert Clive to record the memorable events in Clive's life. When Clive accepted the position of the Diwani of the three states of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa, he also got Diwani rights. Now, Diwani rights were the rights granted to the British East India Company to collect revenues and decide the civil cases. As Diwan, the company became the chief financial administrator of the territory under its control and comprised of the three states, again, Bengal, Bihar, Orissa. The company had become the Diwan. Like I said before, with this position, you have the right to collect revenues and decide civil cases. What more do you want? Let us not forget that the company primarily came to the Indian shores for the shy, cunning purpose of trading. It still saw itself primarily as a trader. Can you beat that? The company aimed for a large revenue income, but was unwilling to set up any regular system of assessment and collection for the same. Looks like whatever the British tried, permanently fixing revenue or periodically revising it, nothing seemed to work. And within a few years after the new systems were imposed, it became quite clear that all was not well with them in any case. Driven by greed to increase the income from land, revenue officials fixed too high a revenue demand. Peasants were unable to pay, riots fled the countryside, and many of the villages were deserted. Actually, when these systems were put in place, optimistic officials had hoped that the new systems would transform the peasants into rich, enterprising farmers. Quite sadly, that did not happen. The British also realized that the countryside could not only yield revenue, but its conditions were favorable for growing crops that Europe required too. And by the late 18th century, the company was putting all its efforts to expand the cultivation of two crops that had a lot of demand in Europe: opium and indigo. In the century and a half that followed, British persuaded, rather forced the cultivators in various parts of India to produce crops, for example, jute in Bengal, tea in Assam, sugarcane in United Provinces, now Uttar Pradesh, wheat in Punjab, cotton in Maharashtra, and Punjab, rice in Madras. And how did they achieve it? This was not an easy task, but the Brits used a variety of methods to expand the cultivation of crops they needed. But there was one crop in particular which the British were especially interested in. What was it? Why was it precious to them? And what were the consequences when the British once again went too far as they gripped with greed? To find out the answers to these questions, it'll be answered to you in the next segment. I'm going to see you on the other side. Take care. Tutormate. For more amazing video lectures, download the free app on the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store.